Hello everyone, hopefully you guys have been doing well. This is going to be the last video I make for the semester, so the final should be open for the 1020 classes. If you go under assessments there, right, you should be able to find assessments, quizzes, and then at the end there is the final. I'd like you to do that by Thursday night if you can, right? That way if you have any problems you can let me know there. I'm also accepting work until midnight on May 8th. So I will be accepting stuff. I did want to tell you a few details, right, about what I think are some of the more difficult and tricky stories that we read in the last part of the semester right here. Now, obviously, I didn't want to stress you out too much, so I tried not to be too rigorous. We'd read plenty, right, in the previous portions of the semester. We'd gone through a lot of stuff. But I did want to get into the 20th century and into modernism and postmodernism and all that stuff. Postmodern art in writing anyway tends to be kind of skeptical of the ability to communicate at all effectively, right? So it really emphasizes subjectivity. And so two of the stories that I had you read were by my favorite author, Gene Wolfe, who I've written on quite a bit, right? That's what I do in my spare time. Is kind of a hobby I had. He wrote about 230 short stories, about 30 novels, and they were all really, really tricky. And part of the problem in getting to the bottom of them is in determining the exact genre of what you're actually reading, right? Because there seems to be this subjective layer of narration where you have a narrator that may or may not be aware of what's actually going on to them. So, for example, in The Changeling, the main character, the narrator, has come back from war, and he says in Korea that some other people might remember it differently than I would tell you. You don't have to like it, right? That he kind of defected, got tired of that, right, after he was kind of captured there and in prison, and then decided to kind of change his mind again and come back. And so a lot of the early commentary on this particular story was concerned with the psychological health of the narrator, right? That he might have kind of created in his mind this vision of an innocent child who didn't change, who didn't go to war, who didn't have all those things like losing the family, right? Because he talks about his father dying when he was, overseas in Korea there at a particular date. But one of the things that was noticed was that the chronology is very specific, right? So, for example, it seems as if he's in the fourth grade in about 1944. He says it's the year before the split, right? The split in North and South Korea there. And then he's talking about the invasion, right? I was over there before the North invaded the South, So he gives very specific historical time frame. And if you add it up, where this guy was in the fourth grade at that particular time, assuming he was born in like 1934, he would only be like 15 years old when he's supposed to be there in the military in 49, right? And it's like, how does that work? So it seems as if there's this 3 year discrepancy. Is he 18? Did he enlist early? Did Gene Wolfe make a mistake? Well, Gene Wolfe was born in 1931. He knows, right? He knows how old you have to be in Korea because he was in Korea. So we're going to say it wasn't an authorial mistake in this particular case. This is where, sometimes the biography of the author can help us. Now, for example, in 25 years, right? If I say to you, oh yeah, I was in Desert Shield, right? The young people may not be able to realize that I'm really quite a bit too young to have been serving in the military at that particular, or at least a few years, right? I guess not ridiculously young, but I'm a little bit young to have been in Desert Shield because that was going on when I was like in, the seventh grade or eighth grade or something like that. So I wasn't quite old enough to serve in the military. And that would be the kind of mistake that's going on in this. There's a lot of other things going on there, like the subjective nature of perception. And it seems as if the mystery is about the boy until you get to the end when he goes to that Church of the Immaculate Conception and he looks at the picture and sees the boy is in his place. So suddenly the mystery is about him, the narrator. And so the earliest readings of this were, he's kind of created this psychological fracture point of himself at a time when he was young and innocent. And that boy, whether it is actually real and other people can experience it or not, like a psychological manifestation of his ghost, his innocent ghost, changeless, right? Whether that boy is independent in existence or not. He's a part of the narrator, and they seem to have very similar names, right? Like Peter Palmieri, the more Italianized version, versus Pete Palmer, there the kind of anglicized version of the name. So there seems to be some relationship, and yet, right? When I was looking at this text, when I started my big project on Wolfe in 2012 or so, I was reading this, and I was like, 3 years is another 3 year discrepancy in the text, and it is when Maria is 3 years older than the boys in the fourth grade, right? And so there is 3 years to play with, and the father says that the boy appeared there when she was a little girl. So you're like, okay, wait a minute. There's a boy who's been around. Now, he's always in the fourth grade, but he was there when Maria was a baby. So maybe, just maybe, something else is going on. So it's like, are there two families, or are there really one family that's kind of like a id almost, right? Manifestation of some weird desire that is like representative of the other family. And the families didn't seem to match up too well. Like there was no brothers and sisters. There's just the father there, right? The mother and father who knows what's going on there, and the father who was weak and died when he was away at the war there. So trying to reconcile that with the 3 years, I was like, okay, if he was born in 1931, he would be old enough to be in the military. That wouldn't be a problem. And what would be the case then? A changeling swap. Like he was a Palmieri, and then he was swapped out, and the weird powers of that boy kind of made everybody forget. So that would be his real family there, right? That would be his actual family while he was taken by those fey creatures. So that would be a fantasy story rather than a work of psychological realism. But like, is there any way to possibly prove this? And I was trying to look online to see if anybody had ever thought of that before, because that would reconcile that age difference. And so I typed in Pete Palmer, born in 1931, trying to see if anybody thought of that, and a real live actor came up. And I happen to know a little bit about etymology. Etymology is kind of the study of words and their origins. And this actor, Peter Palmer, he's most famous for playing a character who's like Jethro from the Beverly Hillbillies. What is he? He's an oaf, right? He's like a big boorish kind of guy who's not a bad guy, but he's kind of a fool, a lunkhead, really, right? An oaf. Well, so Pete Palmer played Little Abner, this oaf, right? And the word oaf is derived from the word for an elven changeling. I was like, oh my gosh, right? So here, Gene Wolfe is playing extra textually with details that will let us kind of draw a conclusion that Pete Palmer really was born in 1931. It's objective fact outside the text. The actor, the famous Peter Palmer, was born in 1931, just like Gene Wolfe was. Would have been old enough to serve in the military. Played an oaf in real life. An oaf, the meaning of that word is an elfin changeling. And so I realized, wow, this is really about an elfin changeling. There really was swapped at birth. And when he wrestles the boy in the fourth grade, it messes with his impressions of him. Because the reason he's not in the fourth grade yearbook picture is because he's in the seventh grade yearbook picture, right? His memories just got messed up when he wrestled his changeling. So there really was a changeling swap. Then there's that whole island. He says, oh, it seems bigger now when I'm looking at it. So he's it seems that the shore is closer, but when he's over there at the island, the regular shore back at the city seems further away than it does to the young boy. He says, no, I hit it with a rock, right? He's like, you didn't hit it, you were really short. What is closer when you're old, right? Well, death is closer when you're old, right? So somehow that island too is a metaphor for death. And I'm not going to go into everything there, but I think, you can get to the bottom of that work as a work of fantasy rather than psychological fracturing, and that there are two families, and that one of them is Fey, Elfin, and Fairy. Suzanne Delage also deals with determining genre. When you look at the small details in that particular text, it starts with the question, right? He says, I was reading a book, and it said, wow, something so extraordinary could happen in someone's life that they would completely forget about it because it had no relationship to the rest of their life. It was too much, right, for them to possibly comprehend. And if you accept that premise is true, then the narrator cannot know if anything extraordinary like that has ever happened in their life. But he gravitates to this girl, and he says, I have no idea what she looks like. But then on the last page, he sees the spitting image of her and the daughter, right? Or it's known, right? He's walking with a friend. He's like, of course you know who she is, right? That's Suzanne Delage's daughter. He's like, what? So it's implied that he does know what she looks like by the end, even though he's writing the beginning when he says he has no idea what she looks like after he's experienced that already. Right? So there's like this weird quality to his memory. And some of the details that come up are so fascinating because they are involved with forgetting things. So now you've heard of the Spanish influenza because of what we're going through. But, 1918 to 1920, when that hit, it was eclipsed by World War I and World War II, all these people dying in a row. Well, Spanish influenza was like a huge disaster, but then it was completely forgotten. So it's called the forgotten pandemic, right? That's what it's known as because it was eclipsed by other events that happened. Great Depression, World War I, all these things that occurred made people forget about it so quickly when it should have been a long lasting memory that changed the world. And there's another thing, there's these quilts that his mother collects. And so when you look at some of these quilts, there's also something interesting and shameful about the history of quilts, and that involves, whether factual or not, the possibility that some of them might have been used to spread smallpox to indigenous populations to kind of commit genocide, right? Also something that was kind of repressed and pushed under the rug. And so there's a point where he says a lot of people weren't pictured in the yearbook. And he's thinking about what is wrong with Suzanne Delage because she's not able to be pictured. There's a couple reasons. Some people assumed it could be like pregnancy or something like that, such that maybe they had a relationship and he forgot that the kid was his because of whatever happened. Others, that the pandemic actually did affect it. And yet, I think, right, that because of the theme of forgetfulness, the forgotten this, the forgotten that, he actually did forget something astonishing, and that involved forgetting a piece of history as well, which is that if these quilts were used in smallpox, right, if you do something on them, whether that be consummating a relationship or whatever it is, right, there's this weird lady who lives across the street who won't allow Suzanne to come over for some reason. The whole thing is fishy. The whole thing smells bad. And everything he seems to say about Suzanne doesn't seem to fit. So one of the hypotheses is that maybe they did have a relationship. He's like, I could have circled my hand about her waist. No doubt, I would have come to love her and hate her. There's all these weird things. I don't assume that about somebody I never met in high school. I don't think that way, right? And then, like, if there's someone I didn't know in high school, I guarantee you their pictures are not cut out of my yearbook. Why are they excised? Why are they cut out? So the theme seems to be excising things, whether it be for a good or a bad purpose is kind of confusing. So you have the possibility they had a relationship and that something happened, that it was so bad that he repressed it. Well, spreading smallpox to the town might have been one of the bad things that could have done that. Now, whether that's a reach or not, you'd have to look at all the small details and see. But there's the widow across the street, what happened there? How did her husband die, right? Was it in that spreading? What exactly is the deal with these quilt parties? And I mean, would two people collect quilts and not be able to meet to examine them if the parents were friends in that way? So there's a lot of things that don't add up in that story, unless you assume that he actually has forgotten something. That doesn't mean that it is necessarily a supernatural event. It just means that perhaps the theme is that we are capable of forgetting things that are extraordinary. Even something like the Spanish flu, or meeting the love of our lives, having a child, and then spreading smallpox and destroying the town, which I think is a fascinating take if that's actually what happened there. And then we're going to come to the final story by R.A. Lafferty, Ride a Tin Can, which I think is every time I read the end, it like gets to me. Like there's just that thing. Would it be love, right? If I should go and they should stay, right? Where Holly Hartnell kind of decides to sacrifice herself to stay with the Shelney, who are being exploited by the Singing Pig breakfast company there, by being fed a myth, right? That they'll get to ride a tin can, which is like this transcendent trip to paradise almost. And instead, they're just going to be breakfast sausage, really. And so that story interrogates so many things about colonialism, right? About how we treat others that we don't perceive in the same fashion, right? Like have people been treated as subhuman or slaughtered because they weren't seen as equal or worthy of certain things. So R.A. Lafferty is also very interested in the Native American experience, right? And he's interested in tall tales. I mean, that whole thing has kind of the feel of a tall tale to it, right? With the names like Holly Hartnell and the Shelney and how they rhyme and how they talk. And those embedded stories there, I think they do point to something. So when she crawls down into the hole for 3 days, right, and then kind of is they're crawling out of the hole at that particular point to talk to them. They've been commissioned to collect the stories and preserve the Shelney because the Singing Pig Breakfast Company is going to slaughter them and sell them as breakfast sausage, more or less, at the end. And the Shelney are going to go along with the myth and the story and welcome it like as a wonderful thing to go on the wagon, and Holly is going to be taken with them. And so at the end, he's trying to get her body back, right? But he can't identify if it's her or not. And so one of the stories is about the burial tooth. Well, one of the things is that the Shelney are only worthwhile as a commodity, right? Because of features of their body, right? They're desired because of what they have. They're corporeal, like they're tasty, right? And so I think that's a metaphor for that. Then we get another one where there's like a switch between a Shelney and a sky person, right? Which would be like a human being visiting their planet, more or less. And it says that the Shelney, of course, accepted the sky person right away, but the Shelney who was taken tried to fit in. And so you get this story of Holly, who's been empathetic with different species, but seems to really actually really empathize with the Shelney and is able to communicate them in a way. So is this a story about her? Because that Shelney, when he comes back, becomes a tree that becomes the shelter for everyone. And a holly is, of course, a kind of tree there that is reputed to have turned red at the crucifixion of Christ. So there's some imagery there about sacrifice and love and all those things that I think is embedded there, that in a way Holly is trying to preserve them by saving their stories. But is that enough when the stories are also a way to exploit them and subjugate them and use them for the gains of, the Singing Pig Breakfast Company there? But at the end there is the promise, right, that there will be vengeance somehow, right? So hopefully you enjoyed these stories. Now, the other utopian and dystopian stories that I assigned, we haven't really gone over them. I feel that these ones are more interesting because they use genre in interesting ways, right? Like it's science fiction, but then it's not really science fiction and fantasy, right? It's really about something else. And so hopefully you enjoyed them. The final is open. It's listed as final. If you have any problems or concerns with anything, please let me know. And I'm really sorry that we didn't get to spend more time in class talking about these things and getting more of your input. I really enjoyed having all of you in class, and I wish you good luck this summer, and hopefully I'll see some of you next semester. Hopefully we will be back under normal circumstances. So good luck with everything, and I hope you have a wonderful summer.